Hey friends, it's RSKT, and welcome back to another episode of the Deluge Video Manual, where I teach you pretty much all I know about using the Synthstrom Deluge. Now, right off the bat, I know that this video looks extremely long, and it is, but really it's 7 videos rolled into one, with each demonstrating a different use case for how you could go about using the Deluge with an external piece of gear, and some of the different processes involved in making that happen. So I actually wind up repeating myself quite often, but we're going to be looking at using the Deluge with, external Midi controllers, controlling external synths, controlling software synths, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to dive into that a little deeper in just a second. But before we begin, I just want to really thank everybody for tuning into the manual so far, because this is actually going to be the last video in the series for a while, or at least until I get some modular gear. Because until I do that, I can't demonstrate any of the CV functionality side of the Deluge. All that said and done, I have teased this already, but I am planning on launching a new workflow series eventually. So it's going to be a separate series to this one, probably called something like the Deluge Workflow Guide. And that's going to be a lot of fun, because rather than sort of just going through the manual and all of the functionality like we've done so far, we're actually going to be looking at things like performance and how to build a song from start to finish, different things you want to consider when setting up live sets, some synth recipes, getting to know the synth engines and actually getting some good sounds out of them, and a lot of tips and tricks videos as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. But back to addressing this video. So as I said, I wind up repeating myself a lot throughout this video. Essentially, what this video covers is using an external Midi controller to control the Deluge, using the Deluge to control an external synth, and also using an external effects box to affect some of the sounds coming out of the Deluge. We'll also be going over how to sync the clock of the Deluge with the clock of external sequences. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of gear, so to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to be using like a lot of modular terminology. We're going to be using the Empress FX Zoia, which is a really, really powerful modular synthesizer in a guitar pedal format. I'm using this because it can act as an external synth and an external effects box, and as a self-contained synth. So there's a lot that we can explore with that, and a lot of the same parameters can be mapped to whatever gear you have at home. It might just be laid out slightly different. For those that don't have a Zoia though, I'm still going to be demonstrating the same thing using software synths. So for that, I'm going to be using VCV Rack, because there's a free version of VCV Rack, so everybody should be able to have access to it. And we're also going to be looking at how to use the Deluge with a DAW, in this case, ABLETON. So this video is really going to almost act as a workflow video before the workflow series comes out. But it's mainly here to demonstrate, how to actually set up things on the Deluge to communicate with other pieces of gear. So all that said and done, you don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. I think the most important content is probably going to be in the first section, where we cover using an external Midi controller to control the Deluge. And then we move on to using the Zoia as an external synth and VCV Rack as an external synth, which, you might not have a Zoia, but even if you don't, I would highly recommend watching those parts of the videos, because I think the Zoia is just so worth owning. It can do so much, and it's a lot of fun to explore. So it might really give you like a really good overview of what that thing is capable of. Anyways, that's enough chatting from me from now. Let's jump into it, and I hope that you enjoy the video. Okay, so I've gone ahead and set up my Launch Key Mini Mark II and hooked it up to the Deluge. The Launch Key Mini uses USB to send and receive MIDI. So in order for it to be plugged into the Deluge, you need to use one of these special dongles. I'm pretty sure that this was included in the box, but if not, don't worry, you can find them everywhere on the internet, a dime a dozen. It's worth noting, however, if you want to do this, you need to have your Deluge plugged in with a power adapter. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now, my Launch Key Mini Mark II has kind of become quite temperamental over the years. It's super glitchy, especially when I use it with ABLETON. It seems to have a mind of its own, so I'm really hoping that it decides to play ball for this video, but I'm sorry if there are any hiccups along the way. Let's just see how he goes. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to have this MIDI controller, and you most likely have a better one, but you need to select a MIDI channel that you want to use. So in order to do that on here, I'm just going to hold this button down and press 1. we can see that I'm on MIDI channel 1. If I wanted to switch to MIDI channel 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. But we're going to leave it on 1 for now. So right now we're on patch 0 on the Deluge. But if we play our MIDI keyboard, nothing happens. That's because we need to tell the Deluge that we want this MIDI keyboard on channel 1 to control this synth patch. So the way that we do that is hold down the Learn or Input button, and we'll press any one of these audition pads. So we can see that right now they've lit up. Now all I need to do is press one of the keys on the keyboard, and we can see that they shine white to say that something has been mapped to them. And cool, it's now working. You might notice instantly that this now means that the Deluge synth engine will respond to velocity. Pretty fun stuff. Now, if we want to unmap that at any time, we can hold Learn and Input and just press one of the audition pads. And now it's unmapped. It's worth noting too that we can actually do this from song view as well, which is going to come in handy later once we've mapped like several different synth sounds and drum kits and whatnot. So we'll go to song view. If we hold down Learn or Input and press the clip row, while that's held down, we'll press one of these keys and we'll see that it lights up to say that it's mapped. But if we want to unmap that at any time, we just hold Learn and Input and press the clip row. So I'm just going to map that back for now. Awesome. Now, let's say we wanted to map a specific function. So we'll go into this clip row, and let's say that we wanted to map the frequency and resonance knobs to these two knobs up here. So I'm going to hold Shift and frequency, then hold Learn and Input, and twist this knob. And we'll see the word learn comes up on the screen. Now hold Shift and resonance, hold Learn or Input, and we'll twist the second knob. Now we can adjust the filter and the resonance using these two knobs. If we wanted to unmap that knob, however, let's say we'll unmap the resonance. We'll go Shift and resonance, hold Shift, Learn and Input, and it'll say unlinked. So I'm going to map that back for now. Awesome. So this is great. We're now controlling this synth part in particular. Let's say we wanted to control a second synth. So we'll go to song view. We'll create a new synth clip. Just pick a random one that I've made in the past. That'll do. So let's switch to a new MIDI channel because we've already got something set on MIDI channel 1. So we'll switch to MIDI channel 2. We'll see that nothing's happening. And remember, to map this, we're going to hold Learn and Input and press and hold one of the audition pads and then press a key. Great. So now at any time, I could be playing this synth. But I can switch to MIDI channel 1. And I'm playing the bass. So maybe we want to make the bass clip. We'll just go 2 bars long, something nice and short. We'll do the same for this one. Awesome. So if we press play now, we're getting 2 bars. And remember, if we press play before we hit record, it's just going to loop back between those 2 bars. So if I were to switch to my bass track here, I can press record. Maybe we'll turn on the metronome. Great. Let's switch to MIDI channel 2. Maybe we want to record some automation on the bass. So yeah, pretty fun stuff. Just going to go ahead and undo those for now. It's worth pointing out as well that just remember we have our filter and resonance knobs mapped here for the bass track. But we can still use those knobs to control parameters on this other track as well. So we could go in here, we'll go to MIDI channel 2. So just make sure that you switch to the MIDI channel that this synth is on. And maybe we'll just map something basic, like the pulse width control. So select that, hold learn and input, and let's just make it for this first one. Great. So if we were to lay out something for the bass here, so our bass is playing, but if we twist this knob, it's not actually doing anything. So if we want to affect the bass, we need to switch to MIDI channel 1, and our mapping's still there. If we go to MIDI channel 2, awesome. Just going to go ahead and remove that mapping for now. And delete this. So let's set up a drum kit. Going to switch to just the standard kit here. And I'm going to switch this to MIDI channel 3. Now, we could map the drum kit to the keys, but let's go ahead and try mapping it to the pads. So make sure that your kick is selected. I'm going to hold learn and input, hold down on the kick, and press, we'll just use these bottom row of pads. Awesome. So the same for the snare, hi-hat, and open hi-hat. Yeah, my finger drumming is not the best, but you get the idea. So we're not really doing anything with the keys here. We can just say that when we switch to MIDI channel 3, we want drums. MIDI channel 2, we've got this nice pad, which I think I forgot to turn the vibrato down on. Great. And on MIDI channel 1, we got our bass. So just before we dive in further and have a look at some of the more hidden features that you can map on the Deluge, I'm just going to create a new MIDI channel. And I just want to demonstrate one more thing. So I made a synth patch on here not too long ago. It sounds something like this. And I really, really like playing with it. But fortunately, since we have a MIDI keyboard hooked up to the Deluge, we can now get access to a couple of different options. So specifically velocity in this case. Now the Launch Key Mini Mark II doesn't respond to aftertouch, so I can't demonstrate that unfortunately. And I won't be able to demonstrate anything for the X and Y components, which map to MPE controllers, because unfortunately I don't have an MPE controller either. The closest thing I've got to something like that is an ABLETON push, and even that isn't a full-fledged MPE controller. But we can mess around with velocity. Before I can demonstrate any of this, I need to quickly learn the keyboard. Sorry, I just have so much fun playing that patch. So yeah, now we might want to do something like, let's go ahead and map LFO2 to velocity, because the thing that's making that wobbly noise, that wah, 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 is LFO2. So I'm going to say LFO2 to velocity and turn this up a little bit. And so now LFO2's rate is going to alter depending on how hard or how softly I press one of these keys. Set it up all the way and have a listen. Now that's pretty extreme, so maybe we'll turn it down just a little bit. We could also turn this in the opposite direction so that we get the reverse effect. So yeah, you can have a lot of fun messing around with these additional controls that otherwise can't be used on the Deluge when it's in standalone. So there are actually a couple of other hidden MIDI functions within the Deluge's menu. So remember, if we want to get to the main menu, we just hold Shift and press the select knob in. Let's scroll down to MIDI, and then we'll keep turning until we get to Command. So we have a few options here. We have play, restart, record, tap, undo, redo, loop, and layer. So play is basically mapping the Deluge's play and stop playback command. Now, if we wanted to do this, we just select, we'll hold learn and input, and I might use the final pad over in the top right here. So now when I press this, we can see that it starts playback and it also stops it. So let's go back. Next up, we have restart. So restart is kind of going to jump back to playing from the beginning as long as the Deluge is already playing. So it's the equivalent of holding down the top select knob over here and hitting play at the same time. Next up, we also have a record. So I actually want to map this function as well. We'll jump into that, hold learn and input, and I'm going to use this bottom pad underneath the one that we mapped for play. So now we can see when I hit that, it toggles record on and off. Tap is for the tap tempo button. So remember, we can hit this a few times to set the tempo of our song, but I'm not going to map that for now. We can also map an undo command, the redo command. Then we have loop,
which will essentially automate like the last few processes that we had the option to map. So first off, it's going to start playback, and then it will begin recording any clips, and then it will finally finish recording a clip. And after that, we have layer, which is pretty much the exact same thing as loop, but this time it's going to record overdubs as continuous layers, which is really, really useful if you want to map something like that to an external MIDI controller or a foot pedal like the Empress Zoia or any other MIDI foot pedal that you have available. Finally, the last couple of things that you might want to map are mapping the launch or mute buttons and the audition or section buttons. So I'm going to use pad 5, 6, and 7 for these. Maybe I want to map the mute or launch buttons for these. So in order to do that, I'm going to hold learn and input, hold down on this green pad, and hit pad 5. Do the same for 6, and the same for 7. Great, so now I can toggle these on and off. I can play, and I can also activate record. Essentially, what we've set up here is the ability to control the Deluge completely with just this MIDI controller. So I'm going to attempt to quickly make something. It's probably going to suck because I'm not the best key player and I'm not the best finger drummer either, but let's just see how we go. So I'm going to hit play, and I might just put on my metronome for this. Let's go to MIDI channel 3 where my drums live. Let's throw in a drum beat. Yep, I like that. We'll hit record. Let's turn off our metronome. Now maybe we'll switch to our bass. Maybe we want to record some automation for that. Great. And let's go to our pad sound. So how cool is that? We're able to completely make a song just using the one MIDI controller and get started really quickly. It's lots of fun to jam around like that. And even better if you have more than one MIDI controller or more than one pieces of gear all hooked up to the Deluge, with the Deluge acting as the main brain. So yeah, I hope that that's been a really good overview in how to use an external MIDI controller to control the Deluge. It's worth noting though that you can't MIDI map the effect entire controls for like the global effect parameters of a song, at least not at this stage anyway. So I'm going to unplug all of this and we're going to hook up the Empress FX Zoia and start looking at how to use external effects for the Deluge as well as how to use an external synth. Okay, so I've gone ahead and created a rather simple setup between the Deluge and the Empress FX Zoia. Those who watched the audio and live looping video have kind of already seen this in action before, but regardless, we've essentially got MIDI out coming from the 5-pin MIDI from the Deluge. That's going into this adapter and plugging into the Zoia. We've then got the audio coming out of the Zoia and running into the line in the Deluge. So in order to hear the audio from the Deluge, that means that in Song View, we're going to have to make one of these tracks an audio track. And remember, we do that by holding down on the clip row and pressing the select button in. And now we need to monitor it so that we can actually hear the audio while something's happening on the Zoia. So we'll hold learn and input and press on that clip row. Remember that the little dot means that we're monitoring. So there are a couple of different things I'm trying to show off here. For all intents and purposes, the Zoia right now is acting as an external synthesizer. And this blue strip here is our keyboard. So what I'm going to do is essentially lay down a simple drum beat. Great. And now what I'd like to do is record the audio from the Zoia into one of these clip rows. Great. So I probably want to trim off that silence that we had at the end. We'll zoom all the way out. And remember, we just need to grab the end point here and we'll move it up. Awesome. Let's zoom back in here a little bit. So you could essentially do this with any synthesizer, and it's fairly basic what we're doing here. We can also just keep in mind apply effects to these audio tracks as well. So let's add some sidechain. There's already a bit of reverb on this, but maybe we'll add some decimation, some bit crushing. Add some delay. Great. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear the audio that we've recorded here. And just keep in mind that the effects that we apply here are applied live as the audio is going in. So I'll have a listen. We can hear that that side chain is pumping. So yeah, that's a fairly basic example of one thing that you could do with the Zoia. And I'm mainly using the Zoia for this because the Zoia can do so many things. Maybe I should have explained this at the start, but the Zoia pedal here is essentially a modular synthesizer in a pedal format. And each one of these squares here represents a different module, just like you would on a modular synthesizer. So you can build your own guitar and effects patches on here, but you can also build synths like I've done here and create some generative sequencing as well. There's just a lot that this bad boy can do, and that's why I'm using him for this video, because I don't actually have a great deal of other gear to sort of demonstrate a lot of these things with. So yeah, I'm going to remove this audio track for now, and let's create a new track. This time I'm going to change it to be a MIDI track, and I'm going to select a different patch that I've got on here. This one's called RSKT External Synth. So we can see that as I'm triggering notes in this MIDI track, things are lighting up here over on the Zoia. I've already done a quick walkthrough of this before, but essentially we have an oscillator, a VCA, an envelope, so your ADSR, there's a filter and a tiny little bit of reverb. This is our input module and this is our output module. So we can see that as I'm triggering this, note information is coming into the MIDI input. It's triggering our envelope, which is in turn triggering our VCA, and everything else is routed into one another. But of course, we're not hearing anything. So back in song view, we'll create another track, make it an audio track. And remember, switch the monitoring to on. Now when we go back to our MIDI track, so this is really, really useful because obviously we can sequence notes. Now we can go back into our audio track and we can sidechain this if we want. And the beauty of it is that we can even go into the settings that we have on the Zoia here. Let's adjust the filter frequency. And we could even go into control modules, drop in an LFO. Let's make it a sine wave. And we can see that this blinking light is representing our LFO going up and down. You can also view it like this. So let's map the LFO to the frequency cutoff. Now that's pretty extreme, so we'll attenuate it. So it's just like what we do when we're adjusting the level between connections on the Deluge. We'll make that connection a little bit stronger, but we'll slow down the rate of our LFO. So yeah, again, quite a basic example because we're only using a mono synth here. And that also begs the question, why would you even do any of this stuff? We already know that the Deluge has oscillators and a few different synth engines built into it. So why would you go ahead and use an external synth? Well, obviously, every synth has its own characters, and the Zoia might not be the best example for this, but one such example is we could switch to this other patch. This is a polysynth. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the note information in here and probably delete this bass track. We don't need that. So we're still monitoring the audio. Let's have a listen to this synth. I quite like the sound of this one in minor. Great. So this is actually really cool. Just like the mono synth, we have our Midi note in at the top here, but we can see that we've got 4 of these, which means that we can make a polysynth. This means that the Zoia right now has 4 oscillators that are being triggered randomly every time I enter in more than 4 notes. So we can see that it's cycling through here, otherwise known as round robin. And that's triggering each one of these oscillators. We've got some sine waves and square waves and sawtooth waves in here. On another page, we have some envelopes, filters, and a ghost reverb, which is how we're getting that really otherworldly reverb happening at the moment. So back to our question, why would you do any of this? Well, essentially, the Deluge can't do what the Zoia is doing right now. It doesn't have this modulated ghost reverb, for example, and it also doesn't have the ability to play 4 oscillators at once, nor does it have the ability to cycle through each of those oscillators as you go. So the Zoia has a lot of different options that any other synth is going to have Probably quite a lot more options than the Deluge. However, just keep in mind that, I mean, you can set this up and save it and come back to it later, but you're not really going to get that audio happening in the Deluge every single time, or if you unplug it, unless you record it in. So we could go in here and sequence in a couple of different notes. Seeing as though this is a polysynth, we could make some chords. And remember, we can take our audio track, start applying some effects. So yeah, obviously that's pretty useful. And it's going to jump back to our first synth patch that we used here, this external synth. Great. Something else that we could try is adding in a new interface module, meaning that we'll be able to interface with the Zoia from the Deluge. Let's grab Midi CC in. We'll make sure it's on Midi channel 1. And we'll switch it to controller 1. So because this is a Midi channel, you'll notice that we can't really do anything with these knobs. They don't edit the sound in any way, and they don't light up when we use them. That's because right now they're inactive. We need to tell the Deluge where we want these knobs to be sending data to. So what I'm going to do is press and hold down on, we'll use this filter cutoff section. Press and hold down on this. It says none. We'll turn the select knob, and it says CC1. Which is what we set up over here. So now we can see that as I'm rotating this knob, we have that little module lighting up. So this is really cool as well. What we could do is map that to maybe, we'll map it to the filter as well. So now when we play this, that's really handy. Let's set up another one of these, but this time we'll change controller to number 2 instead. Great. So we'll change this resonance knob down here. Let's hold that down, twist this knob until it says CC2. And now we can see this resonance knob is controlling that module. And maybe we'll do something really weird with this. We'll map it to the rate of our LFO. So something really cool about this is, of course, we don't need these chords in here right now because this is a mono synth. So let's just place down a bunch of different notes. I don't really know the pattern I want to make, so we'll just throw in something random. Great. So what we could try is automating this LFO rate. So we'll hold record and press play. We can see that that is lighting up. And our LFO over here is speeding up and slowing down depending on what we recorded. And of course, because it's the Deluge, we can do parameter locking as well. So we could grab this filter, just throw in a bunch of different ones. So yeah, lots and lots of fun to be had with mapping the Deluge's controls to external synths and recording the audio back into the Deluge. Next up, I just want to talk about one other thing that we could try here, and that is using the Empress FX Zoia for external effects routing. So give me a second, I'm just going to change a couple of cables around here. So I've quickly gone ahead and moved a couple of cables around. So now we have the audio coming out of the Deluge and going into the Zoia. And we're taking the audio out of the Zoia and sending that to my audio interface. If we bypass the Zoia right now, we'll just hear the Deluge. So we can apply a ton of different effects here. But right now, I just want to show another really good use case for something like the Zoia. So I'll quickly set up a tiny little patch here. We'll turn it on. All right, that signal was a little loud. I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. So basically what we have here is a pitch shifter, not exactly the best pitch shifter in the world, but it gets the job done. And over here we have our audio coming in and our audio going out. We have some slew limiters, which essentially allow you to control the rise and the fall time of activating a specific effect. So right now we'll play this song, and I have two little buttons up here, which will shift the pitch up or down. Let's have a listen. So that's really, really fun. Just keep in mind though that the Deluge doesn't have multiple outputs. So it's going to affect your entire track when you set something like this up. Now, of course, there are workarounds for this. We could play individual tracks and record and sort of record that audio back into the Deluge, which is a bit of a long-winded process. And we could also pan tracks left and right. So for example, if we just wanted the drums to be affected by this, we could pan them all the way to the left and the rest of our track to the right. Send the left signal and right signal out to the Zoia, and then use the Zoia to control if we want the effects happening to the left channel or the right channel. I can't demonstrate that right now because my audio interface is being used by my microphone and by this cable right here. So I'm pretty much not able to demonstrate all of that properly. But yeah, unfortunately, those are the only workarounds right now. Just as one more quick example, I do have another one here, which essentially does the exact same thing. So yeah, these tiny little push button things are really good, and you can set them up however you want. You can set them up to be latching. And of course, you're not limited to effects like that either. You can download tons of different effects online and just sort of see what they do. If we turn the drums off on this, we could get some really cool results.
So in the next demonstration, I want to just go over how to sync the Deluge's clock with an external piece of gear, and we're going to be using the Zoia for that as well.
Now, in this example, I just want to show something a little bit different. I want to show how to sync up the clock from the Deluge so that it's running a sequencer in the Zoia. This can be particularly useful because although the Zoia's sequencer is fairly limited compared to the sequencer in the Deluge, it does afford you other creative possibilities that the Deluge isn't capable of. So what I want to do right now is jump back to song view, and we're just going to change this track to an audio track and set the input monitoring to on. Now whenever we make a sound out of the Zoia, we'll hear it through the Deluge. So let's set up a couple of things on the Zoia. I need an interface module, and I want an audio output with gain control turned on and a left mono output. Great. So anything we make in the Zoia, we'll plug into this. It'll run through this red cable and into the line in the Deluge. Next up, I want a sequencer on the Zoia. So we'll go into control modules and select sequencer. I'm going to change a couple of these parameters, and I might change the color of it to blue. Number of steps, I would like 8 steps in total. Now I know right now it looks like there's more than 8 steps here, but these are additional controls for the sequencer. So these are our 8 steps. One track. I want a restart jack, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the behavior can be set to loop. So we want the clock from the Deluge to run this sequencer. So for that, we're going to enter in a new module, go up to interface modules, and I'm going to scroll down to Midi clock in. I'm going to have reset out enabled. And we'll leave everything else as default for now. Now, we're not really going to hear anything at this stage because I don't have any oscillators or anything set up. But just as a quick example, if I press play on the Deluge, we can see that our Midi clock input is blinking. If we turn on a metronome, we can see that it's blinking in time with the metronome. So we have a couple of controls down here for our sequencer module, including sequencer gate in, a Q start, and the output of the CV. So we're just going to go to the gate in, and we'll take our MIDI clock input, hold it down, and connect it to the gate in. So now when we hit play, we can see that our sequencer is running through its 8 steps, and it's in time with our metronome. Now, let's say that we didn't want our sequencer to run in time with our metronome. We actually wanted it to be a little bit faster. So there are a couple of different ways to do that. For example, we could throw in a beat divider module. But for keeping things simple, I'm just going to edit this. We'll scroll down to beat modifier in this module. And let's set it to 2. Hit done. Now we can see that it's basically just doubled the speed of our sequencer, but it's still starting and stopping with our Deluge. Now, one other thing you might have noticed is that our sequencer stops at a specific position when we stop the Deluge, and when we start it again, it starts from that point. Well, that might be a little bit undesirable because obviously if we're entering notes in here on the Zoia, we want them to stay in time with the notes we've entered in on the Deluge. And that's why we have this MIDI clock out reset output. If we look at our sequencer settings, we have a sequencer Q start. So I'm going to connect those two. So now we can see that every time we hit play, our sequence starts from the beginning. So let's quickly get some noise coming out of this thing. Just going to create an oscillator. Maybe we'll leave it as a sine wave. Just leave everything else. We'll keep this nice and basic. I also want an ADSR or an envelope. And we need a VCA. Just going to move that VCA over 1 notch. Great. So we basically want to tell our oscillator to follow the frequency that we input onto our sequencer down here. So we'll take the sequencer CV out and plug that into the frequency input of our oscillator. We'll take the output of our oscillator and plug it into the input of the VCA. Now I'm going to take the output of our clock and plug that into the ADSR. So that way every time a new note is triggered, we're going to be triggering the ADSR, and we'll take the output of that and plug it into the VCA level control. Finally, we'll take the VCA's output and put it into the input of our audio out. If we press play though, we're not really going to hear anything. So basically we need to go to our sequencer here, and we can either pressing this button choose like frequency ranges or note values. So I'm just going to randomly pull up a few of these, nothing too high, all around the C2, C3 mark. Great, so we finally got some noise. I'm just going to turn up the frequency of our oscillator so it's in a bit of a higher pitch. Also, I want to adjust the envelope. Kind of like the visual representation of the envelope as I'm using it. Great, so that sounds pretty awful. What I want to do is throw in a quantizer. So we're going to go to Control Modules and scroll down to Quantizer. We'll bring in some extended keys and a scale and key jack. Great. So basically I want to break the connection between the sequencer's output and our oscillator. Could take the sequencer output, plug it into our quantizer, take the output of that, we'll plug it into our oscillator, and back here I'm just going to set the key to C. I'll change it maybe to C Dorian, and just turning on, I'll make a new track. Scale mode, we'll just change this to Dorian. So now we're in C Dorian as well. So if we press play, we can hear some of those notes have changed. So now we can pretty much fiddle around with these, but we know that it's always going to be in key. If we just threw in a bass note, and maybe we'll just make our starting note a C as well. Oh, yep, sorry, I forgot. I'll just turn down the oscillator frequency. Great, and maybe now I'll start turning some of these up just so that they're in around the 3 range. I'm just going to edit the oscillator real quick. We'll turn on duty cycle, which is kind of like your pulse width control. And we'll sidechain this sequence. So that is really, really cool. The fact that you can sequence the Zoia with the Deluge's clock, and you can do this with a lot of other pieces of gear as well, just makes it really, really useful for sort of staying in time. So at the end of all of this, you kind of got to ask yourself, like, you know, why would you want to do something like this? And it's because it, you know, affords you a lot of other creative opportunities. So I'm just going to quickly recolor some of these just so things are a bit easier to see. Great. What I'd like to do here is I'm just going to throw in a bunch of different LFOs. So for example, up here, throw in an LFO. And I'm going to change the waveform to random. Leave pretty much everything else as default, except I might change the color of it just again so it's a bit easier to see. Great, so we can see that this light is blinking on and off, but randomly. Let's turn up the speed of this a little bit. Great. So that's our LFO. We can shift press the I here and we can see the random values that it's giving out. So basically we could assign this LFO to trigger different parts of our sequencer and get some really weird results that we couldn't normally get with the Deluge. So I'm just going to plug it into two different notes here and have a listen. Now that sounds pretty full on. So we'll just turn down or attenuate these just so that the influence is a little less. I'm just going to change the oscillator type of this to maybe something like a square. Maybe a sawtooth actually. And we'll set up one more LFO here. Use the color. Change it to a sine wave, and we'll attach this to our duty cycle. We could also attach this to things like the decay. And maybe I'll just quickly see if we can fit a filter on here. Great. So we'll break the connection of our VCA, plug that into the filter, bring that over, and now let's play around with the filter frequency. Cool. Let's maybe throw on a bit of reverb to this track. And maybe a little bit of delay. So yeah, anyways, that was a really long-winded example. I tend to get carried away when I'm showing stuff like this off, and I'm really hoping that the video isn't going to go on for too long because there's lots of other stuff to explore here. Essentially, what I'm really trying to show here is using MIDI to sequence a clock or an external piece of gear, which we'll also do on VCV rack and whatnot, can just be a really useful way to sync everything up nicely with the Deluge, because sometimes you don't just want to use the Deluge as sequencer. You want to use something else that offers different options. But running it back into the Deluge is really fun too. So yeah, let's move on to something else now. Okay, so I've gone ahead and set up my laptop here. And for this, we're going to be using VCV Rack. VCV Rack is a super powerful Eurorack emulator. There's a lot of real-world Eurorack modules available in there so that you can pretty much simulate what you get in real life. There is a free version available, which gives you pretty much the same functionality as the paid version. The paid version has a couple of extra tricks up its sleeve, like being able to use it within ABLETON and so on and so forth. Either way, you should be able to download the free version of this and follow along easily. So let's do a quick breakdown of what's going on here. Basically, all of these things are individual modules. On the left-hand side, we have MIDI to CV. So this is going to convert MIDI data into CV, which is control voltage. And that's what Eurorack uses. Next up, we also have MIDI CC to CV. So this will be for our knobs on the Deluge. In the middle here, I have a macro oscillator. This is modeled after the real-world mutable instruments oscillator. It's really, really awesome. There's like a bunch of different oscillator modes that you can scan through in here. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. Then we have an ADSR. So this is our envelope, just like we have on the Deluge. I've got an LFO over to the side here, just in case we wanted to get some really funky modulation going on. But in the middle here, I have a VCA. Now, I didn't really talk about this when I demonstrated it on the Zoia because I felt like it would be a little bit tricky to sort of explain with the Zoia's interface. But basically, we need to set everything up manually here. You know, on the Deluge, when we press a note, things are triggered pretty much straight away. You know, we press a note on and we can hear it. But in modular, you're essentially building the synthesizer yourself. So we need to sort of use a VCA to control the volume kind of opening and closing for when things are going to occur. But let's not get too carried away with that explanation right now. Over here, we have audio 8. So right now I've got it switched to using an ASIO driver. And this is where things get a little bit tricky. On my desktop computer, I usually use this, no dramas, it's all pretty sweet. But obviously right now, I can't be using my audio interface for this process because I'm already using it to record this video. So I've kind of installed an ASIO driver here at kind of a crap buffer rate. And it's just coming out through the headphone jack of the laptop and going into the Deluge so that I could record the audio out of here. So there might be the tiniest little bit of latency, but I ran a few tests before filming this and it seems to work decently okay. So we should be able to get away with it. Also, that means that we're not using the standard MIDI out on the Deluge. We're actually using the USB and plugging it directly into the USB port of this laptop. Now, just quickly, the reason that I want to demonstrate this in VCV Rack is not only because I don't have actual modular gear to demonstrate using the Deluge with modular, but out of all of the audio tools on my computer, aside from Ableton and maybe a couple of plugins within Ableton, I mainly just use VCV Rack. It's a lot of fun to explore and yeah, I mean, like, you could use any program that you wanted that accepts MIDI, and they're mostly going to behave the same way. I just wanted to use VCV Rack because I feel like it's so versatile. You know, we're using modular on the Zoia pedal, we're using modular on a laptop, and if you have actual modular gear, you can use modular that way as well. So I just felt like it was a lot more versatile to be using these examples and sort of show how that's set up rather than just cherry picking some random apps on the internet and sort of going from there. Okay, so let's get this all wired up and create a mono synth just like we did on the Zoia, but this time, you know, you'll actually be able to follow along with what's going on. So in the MIDI CV panel here, we're just going to change this drop down to Deluge. So Windows will automatically detect Deluge as soon as we've got it plugged in through the USB. We also need to do the same thing for the MIDI CC to CV module. So drop down, select Deluge. On the Deluge over here, we need to switch this to be a MIDI track. And we can see that we're on MIDI channel 1. We could change this if we wanted to by turning the select knob, but we're going to leave it on MIDI channel 1. And that's what we have selected here in these modules. So think of this as the input, the stuff coming out of the Deluge and going into the computer. Think of this as the general synthesizer and some of the options we have available to us to modify the sounds of the synthesizer. And then this is our audio output, and that's being run through this cable and back into the Deluge. So obviously on the Deluge, we're going to have to set up a second track, an audio track. And let's set the monitoring to on, and that way we'll be able to hear what's going on in our MIDI track. So there's a couple of key concepts to know about using modular. But essentially, we want to take the 1 volt per octave pitch output over here, and we're going to plug it in to the volt per octave input on our oscillator. And nothing happens. That's because we need to set up the rest of the synthesizer. Now, we want to take the output of our oscillator, and we're going to plug it into our VCA. So this is just basically like a big volume knob. Now let's take the output of VCA and we'll plug it into our audio output. Now, if I turn up our audio track like this, we're going to hear that it's just continuously playing, which we don't really want that. So I'm just going to turn down our VCA for now. Basically, we need to tell this VCA that every time we press a note, we want our envelope to be triggered, our ADSR.
So the way that we would do that is by using this gate output. Gate is basically an on or off. So, you know, as soon as I'm pressing the note, something's happening, and when I let go, the gate shuts. So we'll take gate and we'll plug it into the gate of our ADSR. However, our ADSR isn't plugged into anything. So let's take the envelope output and we'll plug it into CV input of our VCA. So if we turn our VCA up right now, we shouldn't hear anything. But as soon as we press a note on the Deluge, everything is working as expected. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop the attack stage of this and just get this sounding the way I want it to. Maybe we'll drop the sustain. Great. Let's change the scale to something like Dorian, and we'll just place in a pattern. Just something random. Hope something sounds half decent. All right, that'll do for now. So let's look at mapping a couple of these knobs here. Could try setting the first one to CC0, the second one to CC1. So we'll go over to CC0 so we can see this grid here has got 0, 1, 2, 3, and that correlates with these outputs down here. So let's take this top knob and we'll plug it into the timbre of this oscillator. So if we have a listen with just without using that knob, but we have a listen over here, we hear that the timbre alters the sound drastically. Great. But right now, if we turn this knob, we're not going to hear anything. So we actually need to attenuate the signal down here with this knob. So let's just turn it all the way up for this one, and we'll turn this down. Great. So now we know that the down position is sort of the middle ground for this knob, but when we turn it up, we'll hear it has the effect that we were after. Now let's use CC1 and we'll do the same thing with morphing. Let's have a listen to which side we want to stick to. Great. Let's just turn this all the way down. Maybe we'll turn this knob all the way down actually and turn this one all the way up. Now, unfortunately, we can't use like any of the modulation matrix when we're working with a MIDI track with the Deluge, which is a bit of a shame. But I mean, fortunately, we can use the modulation in VCV rack to do things. So for example, we might want to map this LFO to the decay, and we'll turn up the influence of that. Great, let's drop this decay down a little. And maybe drop the speed.
Great, so now we're getting like a little bit of movement of that opening and closing. Now, obviously, keep in mind as well that we can use some parameter locking here on the Deluge just to get some different results. Which is pretty great. Just going to reset all of this back to 0. So yeah, I mean, that's super basic what we're doing here. And we could go ahead and set up something like I had on the Zoia where we've got a big polysynth, but we're not really going to do that. Just as a really quick workflow tip though, and I'll probably include this in a workflow video eventually. Let's just throw down a drum beat and make sure that everything's nice and in time. Great. So let's turn off the drums for now. Let's have a listen to this. One really fun way to build up a song or even potentially build up a live set is using this external synth, just because we can toggle through these different oscillators here. So for example, let's hold record and play, and we'll record 2 loops of this. Record and play again. Great. Now let's press this button up here and we'll switch to another oscillator. Awesome, let's record that. Maybe we'll do a couple more. I don't want to adjust the settings too much, so we'll just pick one that sounds decent. Great. Just adjusting some of these settings to get like another one. Awesome. So let's turn these 2 tracks off for now. We'll move our drum track down and we'll just label these a different color. Great. So I want to make a new kit track. Great. Let's load that one in. Load another one in. The next one. Cool. So now we have these 5 variations, but we're just going to mute all but one of them. Finally, I want to make another kit track, but we'll go back and I'm just going to drop in a couple of builds and rises. Maybe just nice long cymbal. Like that. Maybe that one. We'll go into the waveform view. And let's just move the endpoint up to here. Let's reverse it. We'll time stretch it too. Let's make this 4 bars long. Great. let's whack a bit of reverb on both of these and we'll sidechain it too. So we can remove our MIDI track from earlier and our other audio track. And now we have this section with cool. And maybe we want to just throw in a really quick bass line. Probably only needs to be 1 bar long. Yeah, we'll just have it at that single note. We'll sidechain it a bit. Great. And let's just drop the volume of that lead track. It's a bit much. Great. So, sorry, I know that this is going on for quite a little while at the moment, but basically what I want to demonstrate is let's duplicate all of these tracks. We'll go into our lead track. Oops, sorry, duplicated the wrong one there. We'll go into our lead track here and we'll select the second oscillator. Maybe we'll change up the drum beat a little bit too. And let's duplicate them again. Let's change up the drum beat another time. I have no idea what this is really going to sound like. Just make sure that we turn to another sample. And we'll try this again. Pick the next loop. And let's just change up the drum beat again. Put some sidechain on this one maybe, and a couple of double hits. Great. And then we'll do this one last time. And we'll change to the last sample. We'll just set it back to the drum beat we had before, maybe with a couple of double hits. Great. So obviously this is not a really well fleshed out song, but this is a really great way to start building a live performance loop. We could throw in a bunch of other instruments for each section, and if we really wanted to, we could save each section out as a new iteration. So, you know, by going save, saving like the name of it, let's call this one Barry. I really got to come up with some better song names. So we called this one Barry. Maybe we just want the blue section in that. And then if we saved a second version of it, we could just have the pink section and then the green section and so on and so forth. And that way we could flesh each one of these out into really big long tracks with lots of variation and fills and other instruments happening. But we've still got this one consistent thing happening, and that's the oscillator changing between these different modes. There's so much that you could do here with this in like creating a complete live set and just sort of editing the notes one by one. We don't really need to use them as this audio track. I just did that to save a bit of time. We could have just done the whole thing with the laptop plugged into the Deluge. But yeah, I mean, let's have a quick listen and see what it's all about. So yeah, I mean, I know that we just dove into workflow territory here, and I'm definitely saving that for a future video in the workflow manual. But I just kind of wanted to show the potential here. I mean, yes, you could do exactly what I did here within the Deluge and approach things that way. But having things MIDI mapped over to the laptop here with all of the functionality of your app just sitting on a computer and then plugging that back into the Deluge, I mean, you can get some really amazing outcomes and just sort of pull off things that the Deluge normally wouldn't be able to do on its own.
Next up, we're going to be looking at how to sync the clock from the Deluge with VCV Rack, much like we did with the Zoia.
Okay, so I'll quickly set up a new rack in VCV Rack, kind of like what we had before, but with a sequencer and a quantizer now. I'm doing this because I just quickly want to show how you can sync VCV Rack with the Deluge. So just to quickly explain it, we have everything that we had here before, but now I have this sequencer module and a quantizer module. I've set the quantizer to C Phrygian, and I've also got the scale on the Deluge set to C Phrygian. So basically, this sequencer now controls our oscillator, and the Deluge is no longer sequencing it. Now, this sequencer in VCV Rack is fairly basic, but there are plenty more that offer up a wide range of sequencing capabilities that the Deluge just simply doesn't offer. And that's kind of a use case for why you might want to do something like this. Just to run through the setup real quick, we have the CV of this sequencer going out into this quantizer, and then we've got the volt per octave coming out of the quantizer and into the volt per octave in our oscillator. So that's fairly basic. But over here now, instead of using the volt per octave to trigger the oscillator, we're now using the sequencer, and we're no longer using the gate to trigger the ADSR either. What we're doing instead is we're sending the clock divider output, which is this slot here. Now there is a clock output as well, but I find it's easier to use the clock divider output, and I'll get into why in just a second. Basically, we're using this clock divider output to go into the clock input of our sequencer, and we're also using it to go into the gate input of the ADSR. If I press play, it sounds like this. So obviously the drums are coming from this track on the Deluge. And we can edit the notes of the sequence using these dials. Now, usually a sequencer like this will just run forever, indefinitely, unless you have a clock input into it. But I also want it to stop when I stop playing on the Deluge. And that's why I have this purple cable here running from the stop trigger output. And that's going into the reset button, which is just triggering this reset button, which basically brings it back to the start and stops it until you tell it to play again. So yeah, just quickly going over this clock divider output as well. If we right click on this module and scroll down to clock divider, we can choose sort of what divisions we want this to be set to. So for example, if I were to set this to quarter note, it's kind of dividing our time. So this is really cool because it gives us a lot of options with how we want sequences and other things to behave, kind of like what I did in the Zoia demo. Going to leave it on 16th. So we'll activate the drums again, and I've got an audio track down here, and we're sidechaining that with a little bit of reverb. So one cool thing about doing all of this is that I still have the CC values 0, 1, and 2, which is this knob, and this knob when I select the second button over, and that's controlling the timbre, the morphing, and the harmonics. So, you know, if we press play, you can see that I've automated some of those values here. Now, if I go over to the harmonic control, it changes the sound drastically. Have a listen. But obviously, we're not using the sequencer on the Deluge to trigger the sequence of notes that we're hearing coming from the oscillator. All that said though, we can still enter notes onto this sequencer and use that to control the stepped automation or parameter locking of these controls. So, you know, for this first one, I might place it down, and let's say every fourth we'll just sort of change this. And we should hear some difference now every time one of these notes is triggered, kind of like silent parameter locking. Doesn't matter where we place these notes, it's just doing the same thing. So yeah, that's a pretty basic setup, but it's one way that you can sort of have a lot more fun with sort of building patches solely in VCV Rack and then syncing everything up with the Deluge and just sort of bringing things together in a really harmonious way.
So here we are with a different setup. This time I'm running the Deluge into an iPad Pro. Now the iPad Pro is like the first model of iPads that switched out the headphone jack for just a standard USB-C port. So I've got a little dongle off to the side here, and we're using the USB out of the Deluge and running it into that dongle just to control the MIDI on the iPad. Now, unfortunately for this example, I haven't yet been able to find a way to get the audio out of the iPad and back into the Deluge. I know that there are some dongles out there that let you do it because I've seen people online claim that they're able to do it with particular ones, and I just haven't bought those ones yet. I went out to my local stores and I bought like 3 and none of them worked. If they had a USB in and a 3.5mm headphone jack on there, the iPad for some reason would only let me have one or the other. It wouldn't let me send MIDI over while recording audio, or it wouldn't let me record audio while I was sending MIDI over. So it was a very annoying process to try and set this up, but yeah, I never got there. So for this example, what I've done is I've set up the screen recorder going on the iPad, and then in post, I'm going to sort of overlay them. But in an ideal situation, you really want to go and hunt down a dongle that allows you to do both of these things at once, and then send the iPad's audio back into the Deluge for further processing and, you know, side chaining and whatnot. Either way, let's quickly talk about the setup. So just like VCV Rack, we have a MIDI input and a MIDI CC input. So we're taking MIDI from the Deluge and the CC note values from the Deluge, and we're sending it into the same oscillator that we used in VCV Rack. Now the modules here are just kind of laid out a bit different, but they behave the exact same way they do in VCV Rack. We've got an ADSR, a VCA, and this time I'm also using a special reverb module as well. So in this MIDI track, I've also mapped a couple of parameter controls up here to the timbre and the morph. And yeah, let's have a listen. So yeah, I mean, that works really flawlessly. No need for audio interfaces or anything. There doesn't appear to be any latency. It just works straight out of the box, and it's awesome, except for, you know, the dongle issue. So yeah, there isn't really too much else to talk about here. However, I do want to just point out, you know, obviously with an iPad, you have thousands of apps to choose from. And the reason that I would recommend an iPad over, let's say, an Android tablet is, even though I don't own any other Apple device and I'm kind of against it, it goes without saying that the iPad and iPhones just have better audio integration, and they have a larger suite of apps available to you for audio production. Apparently, it's quite tricky to work with audio on Android devices, and I think a lot of developers just choose to sort of develop for one environment, which is why Apple is so successful on that front. But we're not getting into an Apple or Android debate here. I just wanted to point that out. Yeah. So on that note, let's quickly look at another app. So here's a synth called Factory that you can get on the iPad. Now, you can get this on PC as well. However, it runs in the hundreds of dollars range, but on an iPad Pro,
it costs like $15. And you know, this isn't the only one. Of course, there are like billions of others. I just really, really like this synth because there are just so many modulation options and you can just get such a vast assortment of sounds out of it. And we've even got this little dice that we can roll up here that allows us to sort of randomly patch different modulation options, and a little slider down here as well, so that we can slide between two states. We can do something in state A, and then partway through we can switch it to state B. So I've just loaded up a preset here just so you can have a listen. But yeah, let's have a listen to what this one sounds like. Let's roll the dice for some different modulation options. So yeah, lots of fun to be had with the iPad. I would say like infinite possibilities just because of the sheer amount of apps that you can use and the integration that you can have between this and the Deluge. I've seen a lot of other people use things like AUM as well, which is kind of like a mixer where you can have multiple apps running at once and sort of route things in a much cleaner interface so that things are a lot more transparent and you have a lot more on-deck control over what's happening between which app and your external gear. But I think that's beyond the scope of this video for today. So yeah, let's move on to the next thing. Okay, so in this final example, I just want to show you a process of using the Synthstrom Deluge with a DAW. In this case, I'm going to be using Ableton Live 11 Suite, but you know, you could probably get away with using whatever DAW you want. Now, I don't want to get too heavy-handed with this example because I really, really want to sort of save a lot of this for the workflow series that I plan on releasing in the future. I think that there's a lot that you can do with the Deluge and Ableton together, and I've kind of used them in conjunction several times for lots of different reasons. I am going to have to find a better way to film these tutorials though. Right now, I'm using this just plugged straight into my laptop, and my laptop really isn't built for this sort of thing. So I would ideally be using an audio interface, but unfortunately to film these tutorials, I'm using the audio interface on my desktop computer. So it kind of makes it a little bit difficult, and I'm going to cross that bridge when I get to it later. So yeah, you might hear some stuttering because of latency issues, and I'm sorry about that. But either way, let's go over what I've got set up here. Basically, to keep things nice and simple, I've just got two MIDI tracks set up here in Ableton. The first one is a bass patch, and the second one is just a simple drum kit. Now, in order for this to work, we're pretty much just going to be doing exactly what we did in the previous examples. I am changing the MIDI channel to 1 on the bass patch and MIDI channel 2 for the drum kit. I have the monitoring set to auto, and I have armed both tracks. And if you're not sure how to arm more than one track at a time, you just press Control while you're clicking it, and it'll arm simultaneously. Now over here on the Deluge, I have an audio track set up so that we can hear the audio coming out of the laptop and back into the Deluge. And I've got these two MIDI tracks. So if we enter this one, this is triggering our bass patch. Nothing really special going on here, but if we just solo it out. The next one, we have a drum kit. Now, if we go into the drum kit, we can see that this is just a MIDI track too, and it's using more of a piano roll style layout compared to the drum kits in the kit tracks on the Deluge. So yeah, we've just got all of our octaves available to us. And this is really handy because you can notice in the drum track, the drum rack in Ableton has like a lot of different notes. As we go up, we can actually see that little yellow dot flying up and down the screen, say where we are. Now, most of these drum sounds live down here. And one thing that this is particularly useful for is, for example, this is our kick, we have a snare, and up here we have a closed hi-hat. Now, I had to change this, and we went over this in the keyboard and scales video, but originally it was set to F1. And if we go above that, it jumps straight to the open hi-hat. And that's because we have scale mode activated on the Deluge. We're in the key of C Phrygian. So in order to access that hi-hat and make sure that we're not skipping the note, I just had to press and hold down on this pad, press and hold in the select knob and give it a turn to the right, and we can see that it goes up a semitone. And now we have that hi-hat selected. There's that great latency issue I was talking about. So the only other thing I just quickly want to demonstrate here is I have set up some MIDI mapping. So we can see that as I twist this top knob, the filter on this drum track opens up and closes, and the delay as well. So the way that we would set something like that up is over in the top right hand corner, there is a MIDI button. If we press that, there's a lot of things that highlight blue, and this gives us the ability to MIDI map anything to a MIDI controller. So in this case, all we have to do is press down on one of these gold knobs and tell it which CC value we want it to have. So we have CC value 1, and then we select what we want to twist. So, for example, if I wanted to have the overdrive map to this, I could just tap on that, twist this knob, and we'll see that it's added CC0 for the overdrive. I'll just remove the one for the filter. Great. And now when we exit MIDI map mode and we twist this, we can see the overdrive opens and closes. So yeah, there is so much that you can do with mapping the controls of the Deluge over to Ableton and sort of having a lot of fun. I've actually found that I've had a lot of fun just opening up my old Deluge projects and then setting up similar instruments in Ableton and just kind of allowing Ableton to pretty much lift material straight from the Deluge and just switch it over to an Ableton project and start working from there. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But we're going to save a lot of that extra stuff for the future. Anyways, so this has been a particularly long video, and I'm sorry about that. I did kind of feel like I was repeating myself a lot, but I just kind of really wanted to drive home like how simple it is to set up a lot of this stuff and just MIDI map MIDI and CC values across to control a bunch of different things. Obviously, there's still a lot more that you can do with connectivity, especially with like the CV in and out and a lot of other clock related stuff. But unfortunately, I'm not able to demonstrate everything like that. I only have a limited amount of gear. I'm just really hoping that this video is more inspirational than anything and able to help people get up and running with connecting things and just starting to have a lot more fun. So yeah, that essentially brings the Deluge Video Manual to a close. Now, obviously, I've teased that I really want to launch a Deluge workflow guide, sort of showing how to use all of the knowledge that we've obtained over the last several videos and start making some music with it, explore a lot of different workflows and synth recipes and stuff like that, just to actually start, having fun and making real music. And now that we've got all of the technical mumbo jumbo out of the way, I'm probably going to take a little break between now and then because I want to get a few of those videos under my belt. And this series has actually been pretty exhaustive to make. Synthstrom also just announced a screen update for the Deluge 2. So I need to figure out what I'm doing, if I'm going to send this bad boy back or not. And I might need a bit of time to do that. Anyways, I just want to really thank everybody for tuning in to this series with me. I know that I haven't been able to cover every little thing about the Deluge, and that's on me. There are still some things about it that I haven't fully explored yet and that I don't know how to do. I had to read the manual a lot while I was putting this together, and I was still learning things every single day when I thought that I had this device down pat. Either way, it makes me really happy to see all of the positive comments I've gotten from people just to say that I've helped them get their head around this thing. And thank you all. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.